Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Twinning with me, Carburetor. Today we are going to be covering the Battle of the SODAKS, the Massachusetts versus the Alabama. Both of these ships I absolutely adore. I love playing these ships, but I love playing brawling ships. Before we get too much further into it, let me just give you a quick rundown of the pros and cons of each ship, and then we can go into the spreadsheet that really details everything. The Alabama, I would definitely classify as a mid long range brawler. And I have to specify mid long range because these are both long range or mid range brawlers. But the Massachusetts is a little bit in front of the Alabama. The Massachusetts, you want to be at about 11 to 12 kilometers away. That gives your secondaries chances to fire and also helps you with your main battery dispersion. The Alabama, you want to be a little bit further back, I would say around 15 kilometers, because your main battery is still not that accurate. It's, in my opinion, it's a little bit more accurate than the Massachusetts, but not by much. And it's really hard to quantify simply because of the fact that they're at different ranges. I don't know the coding behind this. If anybody does know the coding behind it, please help me with that. But I would definitely say the Alabama has a slight accuracy edge, whereas the Massachusetts has those secondaries. So let's head over and take a look at the spreadsheets. So here we are in the spreadsheet. Alabama versus Massachusetts. As you can see, there is a lot more green and red than there was with the Nuremberg and the Makarov. These ships are sister ships. They are not the same ship later on in their period, much like the Nuremberg was, where the Nuremberg got surrendered to the Soviets and was renamed the Makarov. These two ships are in fact their own ships. Starting at the top here, we have survivability 79 versus 82. Now, I have a feeling these numbers attribute much more than just the hit points, as we'll get to in a little bit. Torque protection 79% versus 46%. That is, it's definitely helpful. It's not that big of a deal. 3% is not that big of a deal, but that is a point in favor of the Alabama, making it very nice. Moving on to the maximum dispersion, I would actually say that the Alabama has the better long-range dispersion than the Massachusetts once you account for the range. Here you can see it's going up by almost 3 full kilometers, yet it's only going up by 30 meters. You would think that with it spreading out like that, that you would get a lot more of a spread if the dispersion remained consistent from the Massachusetts to the Alabama than if it were vice versa. I hope you guys are following along. And I've actually seen this in gameplay where the Alabama seems to hold a lot better grouping. It's not perfect. It can still be shotgun, but it is a lot better. Moving down here, the secondaries, this is where the Massachusetts really shines, is 4.0 seconds versus 6.0 seconds. 7.5 kilometers versus 6.6 kilometers. Now, there is something to be said about that in the fact that we kind of have a diverging and a converging variable here. Let me pull up a quick picture just to show you guys. I meant to do that before and I kind of forgot. So this is kind of the best picture I was able to find. You're just going to have to kind of follow along and hopefully understand what I'm trying to say. A lot of the World of Warships add-ons, a lot of the equipment, the commander skills, the flags, the camos, everything are percentage based. When you start with a large number and you're cutting away from that large number, if you're cutting away percentage points, let's just say you start with 10 versus 5. If you lose 10% of 5, you're left with 4.4. Whereas if you cut away 10% of 10, you're left with 9. So the distance between those 2 points has shrunken. Now that's not that big of a deal really when you're dealing with little itsy bitsy things, but it can make a big deal in the big picture. So let's just start here with the reload time of the secondaries. Let's just imagine that this graph right here, I wish I could, let me see if I can follow this and blow it up. I don't think it's going to let me. So let's just say that the blue line is the 6 seconds and the red line is the 4 seconds. As you start cutting away that reload time, they start coming together. So let's say we have the reload time, have it in completely. You'll have a 3-second reload time versus a 2-second reload time. 1 second difference is not that big of a deal, but it is still a weighted factor that I want to look at. Conversely, the base secondary of the Massachusetts is 7.5 versus 6.6 for the Alabama. So as you are adding on range with that, the range, most of the range is percentage based. So if you double 7.5, you get 15. If you double 6.6, you get 13.2. So they are actually spreading apart and there's a bigger difference there. That's why I like focusing in on these base numbers, because the base numbers can tell a lot bigger of a story. Let's head back over to the spreadsheet here. The airstrike. I will say this, in ranked battles, the airstrike was very beneficial with the Alabama in dealing with submarines. However, the Massachusetts doesn't have that, but there is a caveat. There was a post made by World of Warships Wargaming that we will end up getting airstrikes or anti-submarine armament of some kind on every single ship by the time submarines are released into ranked. I don't know what it's going to be on the Massachusetts. For all I know, they could do a derp factor and throw in depth charges, which is kind of fine for destroyers that can sail over the top of submarines. But if you're sailing in a big battleship, I don't think that's very good, and I don't think it's going to work, because most submarines are just going to be able to keep their distance from you. They can't outmaneuver you. Moving on to AA defense. Again, this is where the factors are going to be diverging, because as you add on flags and as you add on commander skills, it's going to get a lot better. 13.61 continuous damage versus 364, or 361 versus 364. I'm sorry, I misspoke there. Honestly, 3 points is really not that big of a deal. I don't know what the continuous damage actually is. I think what that is, because only like half of your guns can fire at a time, or only a certain number of guns can fire at a time, it's taking all the guns that can be brought to bear on one side of the ship versus all of them together, which is what these values of the short range, the medium range, and the long range damage account for. The Alabama has a lot better short range accuracy, 368 versus 238. That's a big deal. That's 130 points. That's almost 150% the value Massachusetts to Alabama. That's a big, big, big deal, especially when you're dealing with stuff like rocket planes. And sorry about that, somebody just passed on the freeway outside my house. and bombs that get dropped from aircraft, because you'll be able to shred those planes as they come in for the drop. Medium range goes to the Massachusetts, but it's a lot less than the 150 before. Now it's only like 120% in favor of the Massachusetts. This is going to be very nice for shredding torpedo planes that come in to drop torpedoes, because as they come in, as they hit their glide slope, and as they come in to drop their armament, they're going to be evaporated. Moving on to the long range armament, 172 versus 175. This is really negligible. You're really not going to see a big difference long range, as you see a little bit of your AA firing out at aircraft at range. Shell damage is the same, shell salvos is the same, hit probability is the same, everything's basically the same here. Moving on to maneuverability, the Alabama does edge out a little bit from the Massachusetts. The Alabama has a 15.3 rudder shift versus a 15.7, but again, this is a converging parable, or this is a converging. I'm losing. This is it. You get what I'm trying to say, though. It's coming together as you throw on the rudder shift modification. It's going to turn from 15.7. Let's just say that it increases by 10%, which means that you times this by 0.9. It's going to drop to 14.1. Whereas with the 15.3, it's going to drop to 13.8. I think it's actually a 20% increase, but this is just an example. It's only going to be 0.3 difference versus the 0.5 difference that it is here. That's a big deal. Actually, 0.4 difference, my bad. Concealment. This is a notch in the belt of the Massachusetts, or in the Alabama, sorry. 16.2 versus 16.6, but again, as you throw on the commander skills and the flags, or not the flags necessarily, but the camos, it's going to come together versus coming apart. It's going to converge versus diverge. Equipment control party, damage control party is basically the same. You come down here to the repair party. This is where I think the Massachusetts gets a little bit better survivability rating over the Alabama, because you do get the HP per second over the Alabama of about 15 HP per second. That's not that big of a deal, but when you're dealing with 4 charges, or in this case 5 after commander skills, you are going to have a little bit better of an edge over the Alabama. That's not the big talking point, though. The big talking point of the Massachusetts versus the Alabama is 40-second reload versus 80-second reload. That's a big deal because you get your repair party back up that much faster. But again, as you throw on commander skills, flags, and yeah, I guess equipment module also, you're going to see those values coming back together. You're going to see them converging versus diverging. So that's really going to be helpful with that. Otherwise, the spotting aircraft and the fighters are basically the same. Let's head back into port and I can show you guys my commander builds. So moving on, before we really touch on anything else with the commander builds and the equipment builds, I just wanted to point this out. These ships, because they are the same hull, have very similar traits when it comes to it also. One of the traits that everybody loves about the Massachusetts, unless you're fighting against the Massachusetts, is with the armor layout, you have a sunken citadel. If you actually see that on the Alabama and on the Massachusetts, it is actually below the waterline right there. So it's very hard to citadel these ships unless you're going full steam and you are making a turn, or it's being launched from very far away, so you get that plunging fire that's going to punch through all your decks and the upper citadel deck. I will say this, I think I've only been citadeled 5 or 6 times in both the Alabama and the Massachusetts combined. I haven't played the Alabama that much, but I have played the Massachusetts quite a bit, as you can see by the XP up there. And as you can see, sunken citadel right there with the Massachusetts also. Moving on to the commander builds, I shared this commander with my Missouri and my Iowa captain, so it's very much optimized for all of those fronts. No, not this guy, the Alabama captain, my bad, I'm sorry. The Alabama captain is shared with the Iowa and the Missouri. I realized something was wrong there. As you can see, I have the emergency repair specialist just because I want to get the repair parties up as soon as possible. This ship does take quite a bit of damage. I have the grease the gears, especially with Jodo. I get 25% versus the stock 20% skill. I also took priority target here just because I like being able to see when somebody is indeed looking at me. It very much affects my gameplay. AA defense and ASW expert. I don't like relying on RNG, but this does help, especially when you're dealing with the CVs, because not only does it increase your continuous damage, but it also increases the damage from your AA shell explosion. So if you do catch a CV kind of off guard, it helps, especially when you factor in this next skill, the focus fire training. It helps get the airstrike armament for the subs back up quicker, but it also helps get priority sector damage focus a little bit easier, and it gives you another salvo in your flak burst. So as you can see here, if I look here with my flak burst, I have 9 versus the stock 8. Again, not that big of a deal for an experienced CV player. They're going to be able to dodge it relatively easily, but especially if you catch a noob guy off balance, you're going to shred his planes. Adrenaline rush, because I like being able to, as I take damage and as I lose my aircraft arm or my anti-aircraft guns, this kind of makes up for the fact that I'm losing my guns. It gets me a little bit better AA damage, and it also allows me to play a little bit more aggressively with a faster reloading main battery and secondary batteries, because the secondary battery, even at 6.6, you can still mess with some people with that. It's not perfect, but you can mess with people with it. Emergency Repair Expert, this gives me another reload on my repair party, and it also, the repair party action time goes for a little bit while longer, helping me to gain a little bit more HP back when I do hit it. And then Fire Prevention Expert, again, like I said, I don't like messing with RNG. RNG, if it's going to screw you, it's going to screw you, but the main reason I took this is because when you are under assault from an HE spamming destroyer, cruiser, or battleship, it also limits it to 3 fires versus 4 fires. That's a big deal, especially since you don't have the fast reload of the Massachusetts. Moving over to the Massachusetts now, you can see that I took a lot of very similar skills. I definitely, the Emergency Repair Specialist, just it helps to get it up a little bit quicker. It's a pretty fast reload, but it's not perfect, and however, if I can get it faster, I'm going to try and get it faster. Plus, I really don't like Demolition Expert because I don't like relying on RNG. Priority Target, because like I said before, I like knowing when somebody is aiming at me. It affects my gameplay, and it allows me to play a little bit more aggressively if I want to. Adrenaline Rush, again, because as I start losing my secondary armaments and my anti-aircraft armament, this helps to compensate for as I lose them, and it gives me a little bit better main battery reload. I will say this, if you don't want priority target, you can get grease the gears, but I'd much rather see when somebody's looking at me versus being able to get my guns around a little bit more quickly. Secondary battery fire range, just to get my secondaries out there. Manual secondary battery aiming, close quarters combat, which gets me main battery reload, and it also increases the I thought this also increased the reload of the of secondary. So I guess if you wanted to, I guess I could actually, if I wanted to, I could either grab fire prevention, or I could grab the grease the gears, the fire, and preventative maintenance. But, you know, it's nice to be able to reload my main battery a little bit quicker. Emergency Repair Expert, this again gets you it a little bit faster, and it really helps to get you the extra heal back damage or the extra little heal back while you're in game. And then you could take fire prevention, like I said, if you didn't want to take the close quarters combat. I just chose to get the Emergency Repair Expert. Moving on to equipment skills. For the Massachusetts, Auxiliary Armaments Modification 1, I run that on both the Alabama and the Massachusetts because I don't want to lose my AA and I don't want to lose my secondaries. Damage control systems, because I don't like being set on fire and I don't like being flooded. This is where it diverges a little bit. The Alabama, I am running the main battery modification because I like getting my guns around a little bit quicker. On the Massachusetts, I'm running secondary battery modification 1. If you wanted to, on the Alabama, you could run the artillery plotting room, but the dispersion is so wonky on the Alabama. Even though it's better than the Massachusetts, it's still pretty wonky, that I'd much rather be able to get my turrets around a little bit faster than rely on sitting at the back and waiting until one of the shells decides to hit. I run steering gears on both because, like I said, they are mid-range brawlers, and I like being able to remain maneuverable. Concealment systems I have on the Massachusetts, even though I should probably load the consumable action time because that'll give me a little bit better heal on when I hit the repair party. Bumping it up, 10%, it does give you a little bit longer heal. But you could also take torpedo lookout system, which I should probably run also on this since it's a little bit closer in. The Massachusetts or the Alabama, I am running the ship consumables modification 1. Although I would run on the Massachusetts, I would run torpedo lookout first, consumable second, concealment third. I should move this around. I will do it probably off camera. The Alabama, I would do consumables, torpedo, then concealment, just because you're playing a little bit further back than the Massachusetts by about 3 kilometers, so you really don't need that torpedo lookout. Anyway, let's head back over to the spreadsheets because I do want to discuss, or just wrap up this by discussing my commander swap spreadsheets and showing you guys how I distribute my commanders. Alright, just to wrap up here, I told you guys that I was running my Alabama captain with my Missouri and my Iowa. I'm also running him with my Florida. So I literally have a 7, 8, 9 here, and to tell the truth, I could run my Ohio on it, but the secondaries on the Ohio are kind of nice, so I'd like to keep those. Which, Daniel Connolly, I have in the Massachusetts and the Iowa, and this really helps me able to keep track of my premium commanders and where I have them. I have something similar right here with my American Commander Swap spreadsheet. I'm trying to fill this out. I just started it, so it's still kind of barren. I have a lot of commanders left to fill in the blanks, but it is kind of that. Moving on here to the twinning spreadsheet. I've done the Alabama now and the Nuremberg and the Makarov. If there are any ships that you guys would like me to take a look at next, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. I did just pick up the Salem. I'm kind of interested to look at that versus the Des Moines. I'm also interested in looking at the Mines versus the Hipper, because the Mines has probably become my favorite tier 8 ship. Even with me just buying the Rochester, the Mines is still a really good ship because you have the heavy cruiser hull versus the light cruiser DPM spamming HE, and it's a very nice combo, especially with the Commander Gunter Luchins, where after you get 140 main battery hits, it knocks it down by, I think, 0.75%, if I remember right. I don't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, if there are any ships you guys would like to see in the future, please leave them in the comments section. I still haven't decided what ships I would like to do yet, but those are the two that I'm debating between. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed. Take care, stay safe, and I will see you all in probably another month and a half whenever I decide to do another one of these. Take care.